Hello, it's Deborah from the attic. Welcome to part 2 of this short video showing you how to complete a journal booklet that we made in part 1. I'll provide a link up there so you can go and see that if you haven't seen it. And today we're going to make some pockets and tuck spots and embellishments, and we're going to zhuzh up our very basic little journaling book that we made previously. This is the beginnings of the journaling book that we made in part 1, and this was simply to show you how easy it is to form this shape. How you decorate it and embellish it will depend completely on what supplies you might have or what things you might have in your stash. So the things that I'm using are suggestions, they're the things that I happen to have and I like to use. So nothing is gospel, don't worry if you don't have these particular inks, and I'll talk you through what I'm using as I go through and as I use it. So I'm going to start with Tattered Rose. This is a Distress Oxide ink and I'm using a Nouveau blending brush to apply it, and there is no science to this. We are just blanking out the white areas. I'm leaving these corner tabs free for the moment. We will glue those down later, but for the moment they're free because these will be a little tuck spot, and I quite like that if you're adding a line of colour it doesn't just end at the edge of the corner. I'll show you what I mean on this side. So if these were glued down and I went in with my Tattered Rose, when that little spot is opened up you can see a very distinct line between the two. Because this is going to be a tuck spot, it's possible that you could pop something in there, lift it up and see that little line, and I would rather the colour extended underneath the corner, and that's why I haven't glued them down at the moment. So there you can see, hopefully, that the colour just goes in under that little tab. I prefer that. And I'm going to do exactly the same on the front as well. Now I've completed my colouring on the inside and the outside of my basic book shape. I'm going to do a little bit more colouring on some pockets. There are two pockets here, a larger one and a smaller one. They nest on top of each other, and I've cut these from my recipe card. So what I've done is I've checked the measurement here. Again, I don't want to get too hung up on measurements and give you a list of measurements you need to follow. You do it to suit whatever paper you started with. But make sure that your paper will butt up to the corner edges, but doesn't go over the centre crease, because then it will make it really difficult for you to close your book. So leave a little gap there. And then the next piece is about half the size of the first. If you have a corner punch of any description, then it's a nice little detail to cut out some corners. I'm going to use the 7mm size. Cut out the corners from the top of your pocket. It just gives it an extra nice little detail. If you don't have a corner punch, you can get a pair of scissors and just snip a corner off, or you could cut a curved corner around it, or you could leave it completely straight. But the important thing is not to think you have to go and buy a corner punch if you don't have one. Now that I've added colour to those, I'm going to add a little bit more colour from my vintage photo. It adds a nice finish, and it's probably the ink that I use most frequently for going around the outside of these sorts of things. Those pieces have all been edged, and I'm going to put them to one side to dry, because I'm going to go back to our book and we're going to glue down those corners. So what to do, the best way I've found is to make sure that you glue along this edge and you don't glue any further, is to add the line of glue to the inside of the top of the flap, and to do that all the way around the book. I'm using Nouveau glue, but use whatever you have as long as it will stick. A thin edge, and the reason we want it to be a thin edge is because this is actually a little tuck spot as well. So don't glue the whole corner down, just this one little edge, and then you can tuck little things in and out of there. My corners are all glued down, and I'm going to go back to my vintage photo Distress Oxide ink and the way I use it, to make sure I don't put too much ink onto my onto whatever it is that I want to ink up, I use the lid. So the inside of my lid is very messy, but it's very helpful. And I'm using just a little foam dabber. This is an oral foam swab. I've used these before. You can buy a massive bag of about 250 of these for £10, and they're just as good as anything else I've found. And I'm going to go around the outside edges of my book, or anywhere that there is an edge or a crease or a fold, and that will add a nice bit of extra dimension. When you come to the edges of these corners, because nothing on this is sealed, it's just a little tube, you can pop it up like this and you can get into those pieces without it inking onto the base on the inside as well, because that would look a wee bit messy. And if you want to add a line of ink to this piece, to this edge here, again, if you went straight in there, you would end up with a line of ink on this base piece. Take a little scrap of paper and use that to protect the paper underneath, and then you can add a line of ink to the edge of your corners. I'm going to add a little bit of ink to the inside here. Remember I said that we would cover over the colour of the washi tape underneath, or whatever tape you have under there, and this helps to disguise it. So now I'm going to work on the reverse. I'm going to do exactly the same. I'm going to go around my outside edges, and I've got a piece of white paper underneath to protect my work surface because I do make a bit of a mess, and add a little line of colour there as well. I've finished my inking up on the inside and the outside of my journal booklet thing, not quite sure what to call it. If you wanted to add a little extra detail, depending on what supplies you have, you could take a little word stamp and ink it up in a contrasting colour, maybe red or blue or green, whichever colour you like, and you could just add patches of colour. Don't think of it as stamping a lettering stamp, just think of it as adding patches of colour to the inside and the outside of your book. I'm going to leave that to you to decide if that's something you would like to do, and we're going to press on with the next stage. The pockets that I made and inked up are nice and dry, and we're going to add those to the inside of our book. So we're working on the inside bit, on this bit here, and the corners are helpful because they show me where I should and I shouldn't glue. So I'm not going to glue on this line, I'm just going to glue down two sides and the bottom in a nice thin line of glue, and then I'm going to glue it down, and I'm going to butt it up against where my corners come in. I'm going to take it right down to the bottom edge. I'm going to make sure that glues in nicely, and I have a nice gap here so that nothing will impede the fold in the centre. I'm going to take the next piece, and again I'm not going to glue where my corners have been rounded. I'm only going to go down the bottom and two sides, a thin line of glue. I'm going to line it up exactly on the first piece that I put down. It's beginning to take shape now, isn't it? And I'm going to do the same on this side. As a handy little tip, this is for myself because I can be a bit of a numpty, if there's an edge that I don't want to add glue to, I hold that edge. So I don't want to add glue to this one, and by holding it by that edge, I know there's a good chance I might get it right and glue the correct edges. Anything like that I've learned from sad experience. So those are our little pockets added to our book. Now that we have our basic book ready, we need to fill it with things. I've got a couple of ideas here for how you can make booklets. I've cut down a piece of paper from my recipe card, and I've also cut down some white paper so that I've got something I can write on, and I'm going to pop this on the inside here. There's a couple of ways that you can attach it, and I'll show you the second way in a moment, but the simplest way is just to take a line of glue, just add a very thin line of glue, and then stick your paper in, and if you have more than one sheet, as I have here, do exactly the same with the next sheet, just one thin little line, will help keep everything grouped together. And then you have a nice little book that you can write inside. And this one will fit in here. I'm deliberately not inking up the edges of the extra pieces that I'm adding because there's a lot of ink and colour on here already. We don't need any more. This little booklet we're going to attach differently. So I've done exactly the same. I've cut a piece down and I've added white paper on the inside. And I've got a piece of twine. This is just some loose old twine. And I'm going to cut a piece that's about twice as long and then a little bit more. Not very scientific. And I'm going to tie my pieces of paper together like that. And that will sit in there. That's a nice little extra element. The other thing I have is I've cut down a piece of paper and then two smaller white pieces of paper that will fit behind it. They're just smaller because I don't want them to stick out of the front of this. This one we're going to turn into a tag, and I'm going to do that by lining the bits of paper up. I'm going to take my crocodile, or whatever hole punch you want to use, pop a little hole in, and then I'm just going to use my scissors to clip off the corners. And they are rarely even. That's actually not bad. That's pretty good for me. And again, I will use some thread to create a tie in the top and hold all of those pieces together. The last little journaling thing that I've done is I've cut down more of the paper from my recipe card. I've also cut down some white paper that will just be small enough to go on the inside, and all I'm going to do with this is add a little line of glue at the top, attach my white paper, and I'm going to add a line of glue at the bottom. The reason I'm not gluing all over the reverse of the white paper is because sometimes, depending on your glue, you can get a glue line and that can look a bit ugly, so I'm just doing it like that. The final thing to add is a little closure that helps keep everything in place on the inside. So to do that, I've cut down a piece of paper from one of my recipe cards, and all I've made sure is that it is slightly smaller than this opening so that it will fit in easily. And I add a line of glue down here and then glue it into place. If you can glue it as deeply into that pocket as you like. I'm just going to do it there. Then I'm going to close the book, and then I'm going to make sure I've got a nice fold on that. I think what I'll do is quite long. It's a good idea to give yourself extra length on this, because then you can decide if you want your ribbon to capture it here or further near the edge. I'm going to cut this bit away, quite like that, and then I'm going to get my cornerizer, and I'm going to punch a little bit off the edge, and I'm going to ink up these edges. There we go, that's that bit. Now I want to add a little bit of extra security to this here, because this is only paper and this is a flap that will be opened time and time and time again. I want to add a little bit of strength to this. So I'm going to use this in a couple of ways. The first way is I'm going to use it to strengthen that flap. I'm also going to use it to add interest to the back cover. Oops. And I'm going to add a line of glue, very, very faint little line of glue here. There we go, that's all sealed down. Now because that's a really, really faint type of fabric, or thin fabric, that creates a perfect little extra bit of security on that flap that will fold. I've added a couple of strips of nice thin silky fabric, and now I want to add a couple of pieces of my net curtain lacy stuff. I think I'll have the wider piece there and the thinner piece there, and all I'm going to do is cut this down to size and glue it into place. The lace adds a lovely little piece of detail, and interest to the front and the back. Now I want to attach a piece of silk which will tie across the front and give this little tab a means of staying secure. I've got a piece of sari silk and I think I've cut about the right length. I want to just make sure I've got enough. Yes, I can tie a nice little bow. So that's about the right place, and I will glue this edge of the sari silk down. The ribbon is secured on the reverse, and I'm going to tie a little bow, and that will finish this off. You don't need to glue your ribbon to the reverse. I like to do it because it means I know I won't lose the closure. And that's our little booklet complete. Thank you for joining me, thank you for your time. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and until we meet again, take care.